And because we get the present, we know how things turn out. So there is no tension when we go back to the past, because in these final scenes, like, we know what's going to happen because you've just been giving us the present. And so there is no suspense here. As far as first time reads, this would be my favorite book of the year. Hello and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura and today I will be talking about the best books I read this year as well as the worst. This is normally split into two different videos, but I don't plan on talking about any book for too long because the majority of these have a dedicated video, so I don't really feel the need to repeat myself, so I'm just going to talk about each one fairly briefly. But if you want to hear more details, I will link to all of the pertaining videos down in the description. But before I share my best and worst, I want to hear what the best and worst books you read this year were. So for the best books, definitely let me know if it has been adapted into a movie, because I can come back to this comment section next year for inspiration for book versus movie content. And then for the worst book, I also would like you to include like a sentence as to what made it so bad, which I don't want to feel like I'm giving you an assignment or something, but I'm just curious because a book can be bad for so many different reasons, right? Like, is it the writing? Is it the plot? Is it like the messaging of the book? So I'm curious to hear like what it was about your least favorite book of the year. I'm curious to know what it was that made it so bad in your opinion. And then also another caveat, there are at least 2 more books I want to read before the year is out. I might try to read even more than that, maybe 3 more, but I'm not going to rush myself. I've read over 100 books this year already, which is more than I planned on reading, so I'm definitely not going to force myself to read more books than necessary. But anyway, I'm going to be reading The Virgin Suicides, which won the poll I posted, as well as the book that American Fiction is based on. So that is a book versus movie episode that will be coming out relatively soon because that movie comes out on the 22nd, I believe. But yeah, the book is called Eraser, so I'll be reading that very soon. So if either of those end up being incredible 5-star books, then it's just unfortunate that I made this video before the year is out and won't get the chance to include them. But let's begin with the worst books I read this year. So I did not give any book 1 star, but I did give 13 books 2 stars. So beginning with 2 that were just kind of forgettable, which is Confess Fletch and Halloween Party by Agatha Christie, who I usually love, but this book was just kind of a dud and just not very interesting. And I've heard other people say the same, other booktubers, and even people who like Agatha Christie admit like, yeah, like I love Agatha Christie, but this is not it. And then same with Confess Fletch. It was just like fine, but ultimately both books were just very forgettable. And then the next book I will be talking about a bit more because I do not have a video for it, and it is The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. And this one is about like a traveling library in like the 1930s in the South, where it was women who were in charge of this. They would travel on horseback and take books to, people who lived up in the hills, basically, which was a real thing. So this is like historical fiction. And so you just have this like ragtag group of women who are kind of outcasts or like don't fit in the town for one reason or another, and they all band together to do this traveling library. But my issues with this book is, for one, it's one of those books that like thinks it's deeper than it really is, or it's like wanting to be deep and wanting to give like a really special, thoughtful, inspiring message, but it just really misses the mark. And one of the reasons this book misses the mark, in my opinion, is because the characters feel so cartoonish. Like the bad guy is like cartoonishly bad, and then the good people just like lack complexity and nuance, And then on top of the lack of character development, the plot was also kind of stupid. So you have the traveling library, and like each of these women have something going on in their lives, like some kind of drama. But then it has like in the last third of the book, we get like a courtroom scene where a woman is accused of murder, and she's part of the traveling library, and she's like an outcast from the town. And so they're just like banding together to help her during this trial. And light spoiler alert, she's also pregnant while she's in prison. And so it was one of those books that was just like so over dramatic, and it's just like, oh geez. Like this part felt like it was ripping off Where the Crawdads Sing, where you have like a woman who is an outcast in the town who is then accused of murder, and the fact that she isn't liked by the town makes them like want to think she's guilty. Whether she is or isn't, they don't care. They're like, well, I just don't like her because she's too much of a rebel, so we want her to be guilty, right? So the prejudice already against her. And it just felt like a rip off of Where the Crawdads Sing. So it was just kind of a bit of a coincidence, I guess, that they were so similar in that aspect. But it also just comes out of nowhere in the last third of the book, and it just feels so random and out of place. So the plot itself I didn't like, and then the characters were just like so cheesy and so cliche cliche and the good people were too good and the bad people were just all bad, you know? And that's not the case with anybody. I want characters that feel real. You know, I like books that write characters that we like while also showing that they're not perfect, right? And showing their flaws, because that's how it is in the world, you know? Even the people we care about and love most in our lives, they're not perfect. So yeah, that is my complaint with that book. And then I also gave It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover 2 stars. This is one I do have a video for. And at this point, it's just become old hat to insult Colleen Hoover books. And honestly, none of my complaints with It Ends With Us is anything different than what so many other booktubers have already talked about in other videos. And yeah, I don't feel the need to hate on Colleen Hoover any more than BookTube already is, so I will just leave it at that. And then John Stamos, if you would have told me this celebrity memoir was very disappointing. He stays so surface level. For one, he never gets like deep and vulnerable about much of anything. And then he's also very cocky. And then he also deflects a lot and will talk about other people and like what's going on with them, when it's like, I'm not here to read about these other people. We're here to read about you. And honestly, like whatever was going on with them, like it's not really your story to tell anyway. So just focus on yourself, you know? And again, I have a whole video about this one, so I won't go on about it too much, but I do want to say that I recently discovered the podcast / YouTube channel Celebrity Memoir Book Club, and their video for John Stamos' book, I didn't watch all of it. I just saw like, you know, a few bits here and there, but I really liked what they said and they are very funny. So rather than reading this book, you should watch my video that I made for it, but also watch their video because they made some really good points as well as to why it just wasn't a good memoir. And Gump & Co., which is the sequel to Forrest Gump. So I did enjoy Forrest Gump. It was very fun and silly. Whereas Gump & Co. definitely feels like it was catering to fans of the movie. And it definitely feels like it was only written to like ride the coattails of the popularity of the movie, right? So of course he's gonna like cash in on that fame and write a sequel book that he knows will do well simply because the movie won all these awards and was so popular. And so yeah, it was just very disappointing. Again, I have a whole video for this, so I will link to it. And then Everyone Here Is Lying by Shari Lapena. So I do really like Shari Lapena books. She writes great thrillers that are always just, you know, like a very fun, entertaining, thrilling read and mysteries that keep you guessing. But this one, you know, it was very repetitive. It was very predictable. And then like the ending, like the reveal kind of a thing, it felt like a rip off of another incredibly popular thriller. And I can't mention which one because that would be a spoiler for Everyone Here Is Lying, but it would also be a spoiler for the book I'm talking about. So, but then on top of that, like I said, I just wasn't as engaged throughout the course of the story as I normally am in her books. So for the most part, I would recommend Shari Lapena books if you're wanting like a fun thriller. Just skip Everyone Here Is Lying. By the way, I do say what book I'm talking about in my Goodreads review. I like block it for spoilers, but if you look at my Goodreads review and you click show spoilers, I mentioned the book that I'm talking about, so definitely follow me on Goodreads. And then Behind Closed Doors is another one I did not like, and I did go into this because it's a story about a woman who was like abused by her husband, and I went into it expecting it to be like a realistic portrayal. But one, the husband again is just so cartoonishly villainous. It was ridiculous. I did not buy into him being a real character. And then the story itself, like the plot, and it was just so over the top and over dramatic and very extreme. And there's also a scene with violence towards a dog. And I am not someone who is like super sensitive with these things, but what happens to the dog in this one, I thought the author just took it too far and it was very unnecessary, right? Like, I feel like if it fits with the story, that's why it doesn't bother me in other books because it makes more sense. Whereas here, it seems like the author was just purposefully just going too far with it, like she does with a lot of things in this. And it was just too much and very unbelievable. And then this is also written in like present versus past, and we go back and forth, which is fine up until the end, because in the end, there should be a lot of tension being like, what's going to happen? But all the tension is lost because we keep like switching back and forth between past and present. And because we get the present, we know how things turn out. So there is no tension when we go back to the past, because in these final scenes, like we know what's going to happen because you've just been giving us the present. And so there is no suspense here. So I thought that was also a bad writing choice because there could have been more suspense, but there wasn't. And then I have Leave the World Behind, which I do have a book versus movie for. And in that video, I talk about why I dislike this book. I think it is poorly written. He over-explains a lot. And he also has a lot of similes, which having a lot of them is already distracting, but some of the similes are just like so odd that was distracting as well. And then he also tries to cover these deep, complex issues, but he does so in a very surface level, cliche way, in my opinion, kind of similar to Giver of Stars, which this is a huge pet peeve of mine. So there's kind of a theme, right? Like cartoonishy characters who just feel cliche and like caricatures of who they're portraying, and they don't feel real at all. Character development in a book is one of the most important things for me. Like I want these characters to feel real. And so that is very important to me, as well as when a book, like I don't need all my books to be deep, right? But if a book is trying to be deep and thought-provoking, then it better like succeed in doing so, right? Like, you know, I read plenty of books that are very surface level and I love them. You know, they're not trying to be anything more than they are. So when a book is trying to be something more and they just fail at it, that is another huge pet peeve of mine in books. So that is why The Giver of Stars, bad character development, and is trying to be like so deep in its messages when really it's just not deep at all. And same with Leave the World Behind. I did not find this deep or thought-provoking. It was kind of a drag and I wanted it to hurry and be over, and I thought it was poorly written. And again, I talk about this in my video, so I will link to it down in the description. Okay, and now on to my favorite books of the year. So funny enough, like a lot of these, I don't know how many, like maybe 5, were rereads. So I already knew I liked them, but the fact that I still gave them 5 stars after a reread, if anything, just speaks to how amazing they are all the more, because I have read books that I loved, but then when I went back for a second read, they just didn't hold up, and that is always so disappointing. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool that a lot of these still hold up so well, beginning with Sometimes a Great Notion. So I read this in last year, 2022, and I did a book versus movie for it, and then I reread it this year, and then I made a second video talking again just how much I loved the book specifically. So I have 2 videos about this one, but oh my gosh, I love the plot, I love the characters, the way the book is written, like it's seems so technical, and it would be so hard to accomplish writing it with like the perspectives are just all over the place, but he does it so well. It's so immersive, and there is like no bad guy because you get everyone's perspective, and everybody is so complex, and no one is all good, no one is all bad. Like we just see how human each of them are. Absolutely love this book so much. I also just love the plot itself. It's not too complicated of a plot, right? It's about the relationships amongst these family members, as well as, you know, the relationships with the townspeople and the strike that is going on. But yeah, I love this one. And again, I already have 2 videos about it, so I will link to them down in the description if you want to hear more, but absolutely fantastic. You should read it. And then we have East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I read this in 2020. This was the first Steinbeck book I ever read, which is kind of a funny one to start with, but I read it in 2020 and loved it. And then I reread it this year and I did a book versus movie video, so I will link to that. But like I just love John Steinbeck so much. And then this he considers to be like his magnum opus. You know, it's the great American novel, which Sometimes a Great Notion I feel like could also be, you know, the great American novel too. I did a tier ranking of all of his books earlier this year, and then I also went to Salinas to like the Steinbeck Museum in his house, and it was just so incredible. And I went with my mom, who's also a Steinbeck fan. But I do want to say in my book versus movie for this video, so a big part of this book is like the realization that we can choose who we want to be, right? Like we don't need to let our own past actions determine who we are going forward. And we also don't need to let like who our parents are determine who we are going forward, you know? And we also don't need to let people's expectations of us determine who we are. Like it is up to us. Like we are in charge of our own destiny, basically. We can choose, like thou mayest, I think is like the quote that's talked about. And in that video, I think I was like trying to find something to nitpick. I don't know, but I said something about how like they were acting like that was such a deep idea in the book, but I was kind of like, isn't that kind of obvious? Like we can all just choose who we are. Like, I don't know, isn't that obvious? But I don't think that is obvious. You know, I think we do often let all these different things determine who we are rather than realizing like, you know, I don't need to let any of this get to me. I can determine who I am going to be. So yeah, I like wish I hadn't said that in that video because I don't think that. I don't know why I said that. So I wish I could like go back and edit that out. Maybe I should just leave a comment being like, ignore what I say at this timestamp. I don't mean it. Because I think that is a very deep realization, and that is an epiphany that people can have where they're just like, you know what? Like, I don't need to let the actions of my parents determine who I am, you know, and just other things. So yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that. But I love John Steinbeck and I love East of Eden. And The Color Purple, oh my gosh, this book was so fantastic. So I read it earlier this year and then I did a book versus movie for it, so I will link to it it. And I read it twice, like back to back, because I just loved it so, so much. And then I will be reading it again in preparation for seeing the new movie, and I will be releasing a follow-up video talking about the new movie. And I'm so excited to see the new movie. I'm so excited to reread this book for the third time this year because it was just that good. Like, the character arcs are just fantastic, and the messaging of the book is just so beautiful. And yes, it talks about very intense, hard to read topics, right? Like, it deals with abuse and all sorts of just hard to read things. But at the same time, it's also about, you know, self-love and self-acceptance, as well as like romantic love and platonic love, and then also forgiveness and allowing people to change, right? Like, someone might do something, and so then we put them in a box being like, well, they are this type of person and that's just who they'll always be. But that's not the case, right? People can change. And over the course of decades that this book takes place, characters do change. Yeah, it's just such a beautiful message, such a beautiful story, and the relationships between everybody involved I just absolutely loved, and the arcs we get of the individual characters, as well as like the relationship arcs we get. And yeah, I just absolutely love it so, so much. I read this one for the first time this year, so as far as first time reads, this would be my favorite book of the year. When it's coming against, you know, East of Eden and Sometimes a Great Notion, I absolutely love those books so much too, so that becomes tough. But as far as first time reads, The Color Purple is the best one I read this year. I absolutely loved it. And I will link to my book versus movie video where I talk about the Spielberg movie. And then yeah, after the new movie comes out, I will be releasing another video later this month talking about it. And then spoiler alert, the hero dies. This one is about a man whose partner gets cancer, and it is just like a combination of so many emotions. Like, it is so funny while also just being incredibly tragic and incredibly sad, and also just like so heartwarming and so touching and so poignant, and just like so many different emotions I experienced while reading this book. And yeah, it's so well written, and he's so vulnerable and open and honest, and it's just a beautiful story while also being just such a sad, tragic story, because obviously based on the title, like, you know, he is going to die in the end, you know? Yeah, it's just fantastic. I really love the movie too, so I would recommend both. And then I also want to mention Shutter Island, which I read for the second time this year. This one I was worried it would not hold up on a second read, because this is a book that like has a reveal, and sometimes books like that aren't as good the second time when you know the reveal. But that is not the case here. Like, I still absolutely loved it. There are just like so many different themes going on, and it's so thought-provoking and so much symbolism, and Dennis Lehane is a fantastic writer, and I just absolutely loved this one. It is so good, and the movie is fantastic too. And also my Shutter Island book versus movie video, that turned out really well. Like, I'm very proud of that one. Like, I think I bring up interesting topics within the book and different, like I said, all these different themes and elements that are going on within the book. So it's like thanks to the book that video turned out so well, because there was just so much to work with. But yeah, I'm really proud of that video. I will link to it. You should definitely watch it. And a quick one I want to mention here at the end is one I recently read, and this is a very short story. It's like took me less than an hour to read, and that is The Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft. Oh my gosh, this one was so good. Cosmic horror. H.P. Lovecraft is like the father of cosmic horror, and this one is just so incredible. It's so creepy. It's so unsettling. It's so unique. The idea of taking like a color and turning it into something like so terrifying is just such a cool idea too. But I am doing a book versus movie video for this one. It will be out in January. So if you are a fan of H.P. Lovecraft or Nicolas Cage, who is in the movie, or a fan of cosmic horror in general, definitely subscribe to my channel so you can be aware when that video goes live. And some quick honorable mentions. Big Little Lies. That is another 5-star book. I've read that one like 3 or 4 times at this point. Absolutely love it. I was on Ink to Film and we talk about it in depth along with the TV show. So I will link to the conversation I had with them. I think that episode turned out great, and you should definitely check it out. And then Me by Elton John. I have a video for this one. This was just such a fantastic memoir. Revolutionary Road, I also have a video for. I love this book and movie so much. They are just so fascinating and so good. No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. This one probably deserved more than an honorable mention, but I have a book versus movie video for this if you want to hear me talk about it more in depth. I also coincidentally had that video scheduled to be released literally the day after Cormac McCarthy died. So that was a crazy coincidence. But yeah, this book again, great characters, the dialogue. I also love books where the dialogue just feels so real. And that goes for like all of my favorite books, you know, Sometimes a Great Notion, East of Eden. All of these books books, the dialogue just feels so natural. But yeah, No Country for Old Men, fantastic. So many different themes and elements going on there, and it gives you so much to think about. And yeah, just that is a great thought-provoking book that is deep and is just like one that you could just think about for days on end. And then On Writing by Stephen King is a great one too. So it's part memoir. He shares different events in his life that have kind of led him to be the writer he is today. And so I loved that part, hearing about his childhood and everything. And then the next part, he's sharing different insights into his own writing method and is giving advice to the reader. And funny enough, he mentions The Color Out of Space in this book because he says how Lovecraft was very bad at writing dialogue. And he's like, and I think Lovecraft knew this because he has very little dialogue in his stories. And then he quotes The Color Out of Space as an example of bad dialogue, which I thought was funny. But yeah, anyway, I really loved this one. So if you're a fan of Stephen King, this is one you cannot miss. And if you want to become a writer too, it is interesting. Even if you don't take all of the advice he gives, it's still interesting to just hear his method behind it. And yeah, that wraps it up for the best and worst books I read this year. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Goodreads and Letterboxd, and also of course subscribe to my channel and like this video. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys all have a great end of the year and enjoy the holiday season. And yeah, again, don't forget to comment your favorite and least favorite books down below, and I will see you next time. Bye.